Greetings, Dr. White and fellow fisheries students. This is Shane Shelburne, and I will be discussing my research for our project on the impacts of dams on fisheries. I chose to focus my energy on dams in the state of Washington. I have recently moved to this great state, and I want to learn more about the fishery resources here and how to protect them. One of my first weekend getaways after moving to Washington was to the Olympic Peninsula and a 3-night stay in Port Angeles. While there, I spent some time walking through a waterfront park that included several large stones bordering the walkway. Inscribed on these stones was the history of the Elwha River and its dams, including their removal in 2011 and 2014. I was fascinated by the story, and little did I know at the time I would be researching this process a few short months later. Washington State, and especially Olympic Peninsula, are home to many beautiful rivers that have provided the spawning grounds for many species of salmon and trout for thousands of years. But many of those rivers have been dammed, and the salmon and trout have been cut off from their historic freshwater breeding grounds. The Elwha River was one of those rivers. All 5 species of Pacific salmon, including Chinook or king salmon, scientific name Oncorhynchus tsacha, coho salmon, scientific name Oncorhynchus kisuch, sockeye salmon, scientific name Oncorhynchus nerca, pink salmon, scientific name Oncorhynchus gorbutia, and chum salmon, scientific name Oncorhynchus keta, along with steelhead trout, scientific name Oncorhynchus mykiss, and bull trout, scientific name Salvelinus confluentus, called the Elwha River home since before humans even walked along its shores. Native tribes depended on these fish for survival for generations before the arrival of white settlers. Around the turn of the 20th century, an enterprising Canadian named Thomas Aldwell raised money from investors to build a dam on the Elwha to produce hydropower for the town of Port Angeles. A few years later, one dam wasn't enough to power the exploding timber industry in Port Angeles, so another dam on the Elwha was constructed. Due to little knowledge about ecology and the importance of salmon to the river system, no passage for fish migration was included in the 2 dams. The fish were cut off from their historic spawning grounds. In the 1980s, salmon populations in and around Puget Sound were dropping dramatically, and some of the species began to be listed under the Endangered Species Act. Finally, in 1992, the U.S. Congress passed the Elwha River Ecosystem and Fisheries Restoration Act, mandating the removal of the 2 dams. And in 2011 and 2014, the dams were ultimately removed. Finally, the salmon and trout could return to their spawning grounds. I have learned while researching these dam removals that allowing these anadromous fish access to their historic spawning grounds is an important step in first protecting and second recovering these fish species. Removing the dams on the Elwha River is important and impactful, but there are still hundreds of dams throughout the country that are no longer necessary and impede fish from migrating and reproducing. Work by federal and state agencies and NGOs should continue in identifying these dams and removing them forever. Thank you.